What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. Fans know that the Cavaliers travel back to Cleveland for a single home game before heading back to the road. I'm with our guy, Chris Fedor, who actually travels with the team almost everywhere they go. So he's coming back from the 3 game road stretch, coming to the game on Wednesday against the Heat. Chris, how are you doing, big fella?
I'm exhausted. I'm not going to lie. I'm the kind of tired that you can't really sleep off at this point. But hey, that's the NBA season. It's a grind. I know what I signed up for. So we'll just keep plowing through it as best we can.
Yeah, and obviously these teams are also having to deal with all different kinds of things that go into the traveling of the season. The Cavs have a lot more away games than they do home games to end the season, but I want to talk about the game that's going to happen tomorrow night against the Miami Heat. Obviously, the Cavaliers are still dealing with so many different injuries. If you look at the NBA injury report, it looks like a CVS list with all the players that are on here. Obviously, Ty Jerome is out with the right ankle surgery. Donovan Mitchell is out with a nasal fracture, also dealing with his ailing knee. Evan Mobley is out with his left ankle sprain. And then you have Max Struess and Dean Wade both out with right knee strains or sprains. Chris, I wanted to talk about Donovan Mitchell first. Obviously, he got knocked in the face by Tristan Thompson with an elbow in Tristan's first game back when they played the Rockets and actually broke Donovan Mitchell's nose. And obviously, Donovan talked after the game about his knee and not being at 100% there. But on Tuesday, he had a procedure done to realign his nose. I mean, we've seen guys deal with nose injuries all season. I think the Dallas Mavericks had 3 different guys with nose fractures when they came to Cleveland the last time. And it's a different era nowadays. People are dealing with injuries differently. And I don't know. Is the mask still a thing or is that still allowed? I mean, I know the black mask is something that many defenses have feared in the past. And I don't know if Donovan Mitchell's going to be back in time to wear that, but that could be an interesting thing. Black mask Donovan Mitchell.
Well, the mask is allowed for sure, but it's up to the player's discretion. And many of these players do not like wearing it. Darius Garland talked to me about it last year, said that he was having a problem with his peripheral vision when he was wearing a mask. It was very, very uncomfortable. It kept fogging up on him. He just did not feel comfortable enough wearing it. So he didn't. In the past, I think Isaac Okoro has tried it maybe, and he lasted a few possessions and threw it off. So it's different for every player. I think it's different based on the position that you play. If you feel comfortable enough not wearing a mask and you feel protected enough not wearing a mask, then I think these players, it seems like they prefer not wearing it because it's more of a hindrance than anything else.
Yeah, Chris, and I know you have been with the guys, and I wanted to see if you got any more insight on the Donovan Mitchell situation. We've talked about the ailing knee that he's also dealing with that has him feeling not at 100%, but we really didn't get into the whole nose thing. And Donovan Mitchell tweeted during the last game against the Indiana Pacers about how good it was to have Tristan Thompson back, even though he was the one to break his nose.
Yeah, I mean, Donovan knew after the Houston game that his nose was busted. Obviously, it happened in the second half. He was bleeding out of the nose. He went back to the sidelines. They were able to get the bleeding stopped. They put some tissue or gauze up his nose. And he came back and he tried to play through it. So it wasn't a situation where it prevented him from going back in the game. The only thing that took him out of that game against Houston early for good was the fact that the game was out of hand and JB Bickerstaff said, all right, we're going to live to fight another day. We're going to try and save the legs as much as possible. But in the locker room after the game, he was joking with various teammates about getting hit in the face by his own teammate, probably having a broken nose. He felt it. He was talking to his personal trainer in the locker room after the game. They were having a joke about it. Drake came into the locker room after the game in Houston. They had a joke about it as well. But for Donovan, the injury for the Cavs to monitor, the injury for him to monitor, the one that could prevent him from being the Donovan Mitchell that the Cavs need to go on a deep playoff run is the knee. Ever since he started feeling pain in his knee, and he told me it was the day that he came back from All Star break and the day that he tried to have his first post All Star break individual workout, he just didn't feel right. His body wouldn't let him move the way that he is used to moving. And if he doesn't have the same explosiveness, if he doesn't have the same stop and start, if he doesn't have the same change of direction, if he doesn't have the same lift on his jumpers, if he doesn't have the ability to break down defenders in one on one situations, it's hard to see the Cavs making a deep run in the playoffs with a less than 100% Donovan Mitchell because he is that important to their success at both ends of the floor. So that is the one to me, Ethan. Obviously, the nose thing, him getting it reset, him being reevaluated in a week, there's a specific timeline attached to that right now, at least initially, where there's a little bit of clarity on that front. And it's going to give him time to let his knee rest, recover, heal up a little bit more. But the knee is still the one that there is uncertainty attached to. And that is the one that could linger beyond a week and a half. And that is the one that could have some side effects that prevent him from being the Donovan Mitchell that we all know and the Donovan Mitchell that the Cavs are expecting to have. So that is the one to monitor, not the nasal fracture.
And while we're on the topic of injuries and updates, I think we need to talk about Evan Mobley, Max Strus, and Dean Wade. Obviously, Dean Wade being the kind of surprise because he was scheduled to come back when they were in Houston, practice, and then popped up on the injury report that same day with a right knee sprain. And he's been out for a couple games. He was doubtful for the game in Indiana. Now he's listed as an automatic out for the game against Miami on Wednesday. Obviously, Max Strus and Evan Mobley have been out for a good period of time as well. Evan dealing with that ankle, Max Strus dealing with that knee. I know there's been minimal activity, minimal movement for Max Strus and Evan Mobley, but have you seen or heard anything about Dean Wade as well?
The only thing that I keep hearing is that if he comes back, it's going to be end of this week. So potential for the road trip coming up against Minnesota Friday or Sunday against Miami. The people close to Dean that I've talked to about it don't seem all that worried about it. It's obviously not great timing because Marcus Morris Sr. was just signed, and if he continues to play the way that he did the other night against Indiana and he continues to give positive minutes, and banked into that is the relationship that he already has with JB Bickerstaff and the trust that the two have between each other, you know, that could be problematic for Dean. Could get Wally pipped or something along those lines. So it's obviously not great timing because he would be getting a whole bunch of playing time. He would probably be in the starting lineup if he was healthy right now. So there's a level of frustration from Dean and people close to Dean, but the belief is that he will be all good, that it's nothing structural, it's not something that's going to keep him out long term. And like I said, the hope is at the end of this week. And the Cavs obviously need him, Ethan. That's what it comes down to. You got George Niang out there. He's in the starting lineup out of necessity. Marcus Morris Sr. played 20 minutes in his Cavs debut, despite the fact that he didn't know any of the coaches except for JP Bickerstaff. Basically, before he got here, he was talking to one of the assistants about when he liked to warm up and what time on the clock he wanted to have. Obviously, he was lower in the pecking order. One of the jersey numbers that he picked was two sizes too big for him. So he ended up with 24, which is something that one of his kids wanted him to wear. So he chose that based on what his kid wanted. But there's just, you know, a guy that comes in and spends a day with a team basically going out there and playing 20 minutes. And credit to him, he played really, really well. And he brought a whole lot of things that were beneficial to the Cavs during those 20 minutes. But I mean, it just tells you how dicey the scenario is for the Cavs that they had to sign him to a 10-day, allow him to go through his first shoot around, get to know his teammates and his coaches as fast as possible. New terminology, new system, and we got to run you out there for 20 minutes because we just don't have enough options to play the power forward spot at this point.
Yeah, and Dean Wade, we know what he brings defensively, and we know what he can bring on the offensive end when his shot is going down. But Marcus Morris Sr. has been able to show a little bit. Obviously, it was a debut, it was a first impression, and I wrote a story that came out earlier today talking about how he'll get to give his first impression to the Cavs fans in person on Wednesday against the Heat. And I wanted to get into this Heat game a little bit too, because they are injured too. Their injury list might even be longer than the Cavs at this moment. But they do have two key players that are going to be available for Wednesday's game in Cleveland, and that's Bam Adebayo, who's been dealing with lower back issues, and Caleb Martin, who's been dealing with a left thumb sprain. But Jimmy Butler's questionable, Nikola Jovic is questionable, Josh Richardson is out, Duncan Robinson is out, Tyler Hero is out,
Kevin Love.
Kevin Love is out as well. Yeah, so they're missing a good amount of guys on their end. And we talk about how teams have tried to take advantage of the Cavs where they are injured. And I don't think it's hurtful or bad to say that the Cavs need to do the same against the Miami Heat team who is also trying to stay away from the play in tournament. Obviously, they understand that they can run that gauntlet, but that's never a favorable thing to do, play more games, especially when teams are going with their quote unquote death lineup or their playoff mindset and things of that nature, trying to get to that next stage. But the Miami Heat are a capable team and are a team that have done that before. But looking at this Wednesday game, with the injuries that they have, Bam Adebayo's playing, so that'll be a matchup for Jared Allen. What are you looking for the Cavs to exploit in this matchup, Chris?
Going based on what you said when it comes to the Heat in the playoffs, I'll tell you this: there isn't a team in the NBA that is at the top of the Eastern Conference standings, no matter how much they have struggled at times this year, no matter how poorly they're playing right now, no matter how they're still trying to figure things out, especially with the addition of Terry Rozier and how do all the pieces fit together. There isn't a team at the top of the Eastern Conference, Ethan, that wants to see Miami in a 7 game series. All of those teams at the top of the Eastern Conference are saying, we'll take our chances with Chicago, Atlanta, Indiana, even the 76ers with a less than 100% Joel Embiid or a not fully effective Joel Embiid. No one wants to see the Heat. They've got too much big game experience, they've got too much talent on the roster, and they've got arguably the best coach in the NBA who can shift a 7 game series in their favor. Miami is the kind of team that it doesn't matter about seeding. It doesn't matter about how they're playing. They understand the level that it takes in the playoffs, and they know how to get to that particular level. At least their main players do. So the Cavs, the Bucks, the Celtics, they want no part of Miami, despite some of the issues that the Heat have shown throughout the course of this season. Beyond that, I don't know that we really learn a whole bunch in the matchup Wednesday night between the Cavs and the Heat. It loses a lot when you're talking about everything that the Cavs are missing. In fact, the other night before the Indiana game, I asked JB Bickerstaff, I said, hey, look, as of right now, you guys are 3, Indiana is 6. If the season were to end today, that would be the first round playoff matchup. Given that you're playing them right now so close to the playoffs, do you feel like you have to hold things back schematically, strategically, anything along those lines? And JB just laughed and he was like, well, we don't really have to because we're going to be a lot different, we hope, if that matchup comes to fruition. Because the hope is we'll have Donovan Mitchell, we'll have Max Struess, we'll have Evan Mobley, we'll have Dean Wade. So, like, we look different right now, and there's only so many things that we can do from a schematic and a strategic standpoint because of the bodies that we're missing. And I think it's the same thing when it comes to the Miami Heat. This does not give a window into how a series would go between the two teams. This is just a situation where the Cavs are at home, coming off a road trip, despite the fact that they're dealing with a whole bunch of injuries themselves, they have an opportunity against a wounded opponent. And on their own home court, it's going to be up to them to capitalize on it and see if they can bank this win. I honestly think, Ethan, the number that the Cavs are shooting for internally is 52-53 in terms of season long wins. And if they get to that point, I think they'll feel pretty good about their place in the Eastern Conference. Right now, they're at 43. So the more wins you can bank against quote unquote vulnerable opponents, the better you're going to be because that West Coast road trip at the end of the season looms for the Cavs, and it is going to be grueling. And I think they're probably going to get the best of all those teams. It's not like those teams that they're going to be facing are comfortable enough with their standing that they can start resting players or things like that. So it's basically full go from here on out. Try and get as many wins as possible by any means possible.
We talked about earlier in the season not the need to chase wins, but I think at this point in the season, it's like you need to just keep racking them up. When we're getting into these kind of times and this kind of scenarios with seeding and who you're going to play and those type of things, that's more important right now than it was earlier in the season. So I don't want to see in the comments section people were like, well, they used to say that it didn't matter the games that was earlier in the season. This is now. Things change.
Also, here's the other thing that the Cavs have to pay attention to, Ethan. So they're right now in the 3 seed, and we've talked a lot throughout the course of this season about Milwaukee, Cleveland battling for the number 2 seed in the Eastern Conference and what that could mean in a first round playoff series for either one of those opponents and the level of opponent that they would play would probably be beneficial to them if they get the 2 seed and then avoiding Boston, their side of the bracket, all that kind of stuff. So we've talked a lot about that, and the Cavs are only 1 game back of the Bucks right now for the 2 seed, and the Cavs hold the tiebreaker over Milwaukee because they beat Indiana the other night. But the dirty little secret is that Orlando is not going away. The Knicks, despite the fact that they're dealing with injuries, they continue to surge. The Knicks are 2 games back of the Cavs. Just two. Orlando is only 2.5 games back of the Cavs. So one bad week, right? And then one good week on top of that from New York or Orlando. And all of a sudden, the Cavs could go from let's race to see if we can get number 2 to suddenly we are in the 5 spot and we no longer have home court advantage in the first round and we're on the same side of the bracket as Boston. That is a real possibility right now.
Yeah, and we've talked about how obviously the one team that the Cavs really don't want to face in the first round is the New York Knicks. And the expectation is that if the Cavs were to move down the standings, that means the Knicks would move up because we obviously know 4-5 play each other. So you don't want to end up with the Cavs in the 4 seed and the Knicks in the 5 seed, or the vice versa, the Knicks in the 4 seed, the Cavs in the 5 seed, and having to see that matchup again. So this next stretch is really important for the Cavs. They got the Heat, Timberwolves, then the Heat again. Then they get 2 games that should be banked wins against the Hornets back to back. That's a home, then an away game. Then they get the 76ers, the Nuggets, and then April rolls around and you get the Jazz, who are a capable team, the Suns, who we all know about, the Lakers, Clippers, and then they return home for 3 games to end the season against teams that the Cavs think that they should beat, the Grizzlies, Pacers, and Hornets. So, like Chris said, you really got to pay attention to what the standings are going to do over the last couple weeks of the season because it could be a jumbled up mess with how the standings are going to change up and down.
And right now, if we're being honest, New York is in a better position and they're playing better basketball than the Cavs. So they're in a better position to move up. Orlando playing better basketball than the Cavs. They're in position to overtake the Cavs as well, especially because the Cavs are going to be without Donovan Mitchell for at least a week, if not longer, especially because There's still a lot of uncertainty on when Evan Mobley is going to return, and Max Strus may not be back until the end of this month. So, like, based on all of those different factors, it just seems more likely that the Cavs drop in the standings than it is that they catch Milwaukee for number two. And I don't want to sound doom and gloom or anything along those lines when it comes to the Cavs. They have done a great job of weathering all of these injuries and staying in the top three in the Eastern Conference for a majority of this second half of the season. And the win that they had over Indiana was a gutsy win. That was a quality win, but they have played inconsistent basketball since the All Star break. They haven't played at the same level as New York, they haven't played at the same level as Orlando. And if they continue to be inconsistent, and New York and Orlando continue to play at the level that they have shown recently, then I think the Cavs find themselves in a potentially dangerous spot when it comes to the standings.
Yeah, think about everything that's going on around the league, players coming back, players getting injured. It's a big old mess. But I mean, this Cavs team over the last 7 games are 3-4 for starters, when the Miami Heat are 2-5, and the Cavs, who are known for their defense, have fallen out of the top 15 in defensive rating over the last 7 games, and then on offense, they've fallen all the way down to the 20 spot in offensive rating. So it's definitely been a trial and error type of situation with the Cavs with all the injuries that they're dealing with. But I hate to say this, but they need somebody to step up for them again. Because when Darius Garland and Evan Mobley were out, it seemed like every single night there was somebody different that stepped up to take the task. Whether that was Donovan Mitchell facilitating and getting people involved, or scoring on his own, or Sam Merrill, George Niang, Dean Wade. The list goes on. But I remember seeing on Twitter recently that there was a guy, I think he was just a regular fan, that was putting together like his win loss of who he thought the Cavs were going to beat over the rest of the season. And he literally had the reverse of every single game that had
Nice,
happened
I
in the
love it.
last like 10 days. And I was like, this is I don't know. I didn't know you can do this. Like, I didn't know you could be completely backwards, which was really
And
funny to
that's
me.
why that city in Nevada that has all of those shiny, fancy buildings, that's why all of those shiny, fancy buildings exist. Because we've got Joe from Strongsville, or whoever it is. There's some guy named Joe from Strongsville listening to this podcast saying, Feedor's calling me out. Like, no, not you specifically. I'm saying just throwing out a name and throwing out a city. You got Joe from Strongsville thinking that, he's a gambling aficionado, a sports aficionado, and the NBA is tough. The NBA can be very surprising. The NBA is very unpredictable, especially in the regular season when there are so many circumstances tied to it.
It's really hard for even me to predict. I'm new to the game and trying to figure things out on the fly. And I remember going on a different podcast the other day, and it was like they do like a weekend or like a week and try to predict the games that week. And I think that was the week that the Cavs had the Celtics, Hawks, Timberwolves, and Nets. And obviously, looking at the schedule and looking at what Boston was doing, the Timberwolves at the time, I was like, well, and that's what makes this difficult because on any given night, any team can, well, yeah, I would say any team can pull out a victory.
Eh, Washington.
That's
Eh,
why I second guess myself. That's definitely the team that came to mind.
Washington still exists in this world. Yeah. The prediction game is a fool's errand. I'll stay away from that as much as I can. I'll tell you how. I'll tell you why. I'll tell you all the things that the smart people are telling me. I'll relay that information to you. I'll pick everybody's brain that I possibly can that I think is smarter at basketball than me, and I'll relay that information. But if you're following my stuff because you want 100% accuracy on predictions of things, yeah, that's probably not going to happen because I'm not the gambling man. I'm not going to be successful in that. And like I said, I think it's a fool's errand.
Yeah. And speaking of guys that know the game better than us, Chris, I want to talk about what we're going to talk about after the break. Two guys that have played in the NBA for a long time, one arguably the greatest player of all time, have combined to create a new podcast that will go into the X's and O's and give detail to things that will help regular basketball fans turn into knowledgeable fans, like we try to help you guys do. But Chris, I want to get into that more after the break. But before then, become a Cavs insider and interact with me and Chris by subscribing to Subtext. Sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com /Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word stop. It's easy. But we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from Chris and me. We'll be right back. All right, we're back. Chris, this podcast that I'm talking about is being hosted by JJ Redick and LeBron James. I mean, I'm a nerd when it comes to looking up stats and trying to figure out X's and O's. And I was like, I don't know how much I'm going to learn from this podcast because obviously there's just levels to knowledge of the game and what you've experienced and what you've been around. And I'm not a big podcast listener, but when I tell you I listened to this first podcast episode, or actually I watched it on YouTube, and I was like, wow, if this is what it's gonna be for however many episodes, I'm gonna feel like a basketball genius by the end of this. But Chris, I mean, these guys obviously have been around the game for a long, long time. How do you think that this podcast will differ from different shows that we've seen come around the league? And I mean, we're talking about ESPN, TNT, things like those shows, and even ours. How do you feel like that's going to be different from what everybody else is doing?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the insight that they have is going to be different just from the very beginning. LeBron's arguably the smartest player in NBA history. JJ Redick is brilliant. There's a reason why he has gotten so many different gigs doing TV stuff, analyst work. He can break down the game, he can explain it in a way. I just wonder if they're going to be able to explain it in a way that is going to be digestible for the listener, because I think that's very, very important. And maybe this is my broadcasting and communications background coming out, but when I was doing radio for 10 years, Ethan, it wasn't my job to teach fans the game, right? It wasn't my job to speak in a language that was going to make me sound smarter. My job was to try and present my opinion and present the things that I believed in a way that everybody could understand it. Whether it was a 12-year-old listening in their car, or it was a 50-year-old man, or it was a 30-year-old female, because you just don't know who your audience is going to be. And if you were on the radio and you started talking about pin downs and floppy sets and hammer actions and double drags, there are people that would be like, you know what I'm saying? Because, like, there's just not a level of understanding to that same level from everybody that would be listening. So I think it's really, really important to present the NBA product and to talk basketball in a way that people other than LeBron James, JJ Redick, Donovan Mitchell, Hubie Brown, Doris Burke, and some of these other people are going to understand it and say, oh, that makes sense. But once you start talking about terminology and you start using words and phrases that not everybody understands, I don't know that there's going to be enough entertainment to balance that out for the average listener, for the average basketball fan, for the average sports fan. There is a segment of sports fans that are going to eat this up. There's no doubt about it. It's LeBron James, it's JJ Redick. It's talking ball in a different kind of way. But again, I don't know that every single fan is going to love this particular format. There's a reason why Stephen A. Smith is very, very successful. There's a reason why he makes millions. Because TV, in large part, it's an entertainment industry. Podcast, in large part, it's an entertainment industry. Fans want to be entertained, they want to be drawn in. And different is going to draw them in initially because I think you're going to want to hear what LeBron says, what JJ Redick says. There's a natural curiosity about how different it's going to be when you have those two guys talking ball. But there has to be enough that the average fan is going to want to sit and listen through. And I just wonder if there's going to be enough of that.
Yeah, and I mean, after watching the first episode that they did on YouTube, at least, they had definitions of different forms of like floppy sets and hammers and all of those things. Like they had definitions, and JJ Redick actually gave like a precursor to give insight to what things were. And then during the actual episode, they had like little definition screens pull up, and they had videos that would play different plays to show the actions and things of that nature, which I thought was really creative and really interesting. The one critique that I do have of the podcast already, and it's not even about content, it's not about entertainment, it's not about any of that. Whoever was manning JJ Redick's camera, his ISO camera, oh my god. Like, and that's me nerding out on a production aspect because it was like moving and like his head was never in the middle and all of those things, and that's partially why we haven't transitioned over to video yet, because I'm so nitpicky when it comes to the video things. But I want to let our insiders, our listeners, let us know. You can add us on Twitter, we're at Wine Gold Talk Pod, or you can also hit us on Instagram, we're at Wine and Gold Talk Podcast. On those platforms, let us know how we can be more entertaining for you guys, because I know that we get into the nitty gritty of the games, the injuries, what's going on around the league, but I want to know how we can make this more fun for you all. And I think that's what we need to do to grow in this podcast, because we bring you the insight. We got Chris Fedor, who I want to give a shout out to because he did just get recognition by the PBWA. People who don't know what that is, they're Professional Basketball Writers Association. Yes, we are a podcast, but this is through cleveland.com and the Plain Dealer, and we write as well. So if you're not getting as much insight as you think you need from me or Chris, go read Chris, because I'm telling you, he's giving you everything and more that is discussed on the podcast, especially because it's a different kind of form. So shout out to you, Chris. Getting honorable mention by PBWA. That's a huge
Thank
honor.
you.
Congratulations.
Did you see the judge's comment on that too? I thought it was hilarious.
Yeah, I did. I did.
All right. So for those that didn't see it, this was so funny. All right. So the story that I won honorable mention for was in the news category of Cavs not looking at sweeping changes despite disappointing playoff exit. It was a conversation that I had with President of Basketball Operations, Kobe Altman, and it was just laying out, okay, here's where the Cavs are, here's how they got here, and here's what they need to do to keep progressing and taking the next step. It was all of that laid out under the umbrella of this was a terrible playoff loss against the New York Knicks. And I thought it was so funny that this line was used by the judge. And I actually sent this to the Cavs. I thought it was so funny. All right. Quote, Kobe Altman is a talkative fellow, and some of his quotes tend to run on a bit, but they're direct answers to direct questions and definitely not boilerplate. If you picked up this story knowing nothing about the Cavs, you'd probably be pretty well informed by the time you finished reading. But the fact that the judge said, quote, Kobe Altman is a talkative fellow, and some of his quotes tend to run on a bit, I was dying at that.
Hey man, if it's a good quote, you gotta use it. Like
I know,
sometimes,
right?
sometimes you can't put it in any better words than what are already being said. That's the main thing. But
Yeah.
hey, that's a great honor. Congratulations
Thanks,
to you,
man. I
Chris.
appreciate that.
For sure. And that's what I want everybody who listens to this podcast to understand. Like, we are not your typical fans, even though I may come off as someone who is very into the game and wanted to be as exciting and entertaining as possible. We do get into the X's and O's, we do get into the stats, we do get into the locker rooms and the insight and all of those things that will make this podcast more informative, maybe than one of the Stephen A. Smith shows where he's going into what Pokemon he would have chose for his starter. I don't know. I just saw that on my Twitter page earlier today, so I'm going to use that example. But if that's something that you would want us to do more of, if that's some more
I
entertaining.
don't do Pokemon. That's not happening. Nope. Mm-mm. We'll get Jared Allen to guest host that one if you want to start talking Pokemon.
Man,
Nope.
me and Jared Allen would geek out on some Pokemon. I don't know what
There
you're
you go.
talking about. anyway,
There's no
if
doubt about that.
Anyway,
Hmm.
if there's more entertaining topics or things you would like us to discuss, let us know. But I'm going to tell you how you can get us that information. But first, Chris, is there anything else you want to discuss before we wrap up this podcast?
No, I want to go to bed.
And y'all know the rules. When Chris says we're done, we are done. So that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris and me by subscribing to Subtext. This is where you can let us know your comments on the podcast, let us know what topic we didn't get to, and let us know what other entertaining features you would like to see added to this podcast. Because when I tell you we're going to go hard trying to figure out how to make this podcast better during the off season, that's the goal. But to do all of these things, you need to sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com /Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word stop. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me and Chris. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.